I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting 108 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Before we begin, I would like to remind all members and other meeting participants in the room of the following important preventative measures. To prevent disruption and potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injuries, all in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from all microphones at all times. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on Monday, April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidences. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in color, whereas the former earpieces were gray. Please use only the black approved earpieces. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of the meeting. When you're not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for the purpose that you will find on the table as indicated. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. These measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I'd also like to make a few comments for the benefit of all members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize your name by speaking or before speaking. And for members in the room, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can, and we appreciate your understanding in this regard. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. When there is 30 seconds remaining, I will raise my 30 seconds. When your time is done, I'll raise another card suggesting that your time is done. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, November 27th, 2023, the committee will resume its study on coercive behavior. Before we welcome our witnesses, I would like to provide the trigger warning. We will be discussing experiences related to violence and coercive control. This may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. If you feel distressed or need help, please advise the clerk. For all witnesses and for members of Parliament, it is important to recognize that these are difficult discussions, so let's try to be compassionate with our conversations. At this point, I would like now to welcome our witnesses from the Salvation Army. We have Barbara Ridley, Executive Director, Governing Council at Sudbury Cedar Place, and Taylor Briscoe, Assistant Director with Public Affairs. As an individual, we also have Carmen Gill, Professor, Department of Sociology, University of New Brunswick, joining us by video conference. And from the Women of the Métis Nation, we have Lisa Pijou, Director of Intergovernmental Relations, also joining us by video conference. Each organization will have 5 minutes for opening remarks, followed by a round of questions. At this point, I will give the floor to Ms. Ridley and then Ms. Briscoe. You will have 5 minutes to share. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. On behalf of the Salvation Army, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you on the committee's study of coercive behavior. We are honored to represent the voices of the women and families we serve who too often have found themselves without a voice. My name is Barbara Ridley, and I'm currently the Executive Director of the Sudbury Cedar Place Women and Family Shelter in Sudbury, Ontario. Prior to this, I worked in community and hospital settings, providing training across the province on the subjects of women, addiction, mental health, and trauma. At Cedar Place, we provide shelter to 28 women, children, and families, and each night our beds are full, and nearly all individuals we serve have experienced coercive violence, children included. In our city, with a population of over 168,000, police respond to an average of 8 intimate partner violence-related incidents a day. These numbers have climbed steadily since 2013. with the Greater Sudbury Police Services responding to 2,846 incidents annually. When these incidents occur, the police call us, and we do everything that we can to meet the increasing demand on our emergency shelter. This represents similar trends across the country. The Salvation Army provides nearly 4,000 shelter beds nightly, with 439 serving women and 79 serving families across Canada. When a woman or a family arrives at our door, there is a unique history of trauma that arrives with them, and coercion is undoubtedly a part of their history. These acts become particularly egregious when children are involved. I think of Mary, who finally had the courage to leave her partner after 10 years of extreme isolation from family and friends and continuous daily rants. How would you feel as a mother, hearing your partner call you a slut or an idiot every day in front of your children? These types of rants were coercive behavior to ensure that she would stay. Sadly, she arrived at the shelter without her children, wrongfully believing that she would not be able to financially provide for them. All she knew is that she feared for her life. Coercion creates a generational trauma, and as the committee considers changes to the Criminal Code of Canada, we hope that a re-examination of family law is not forgotten. Children deserve their own legal protection, and we would encourage the creation of a standalone law that further punishes the coercion of children through threats, manipulation, intimidation, and isolation. Concurrent with legal changes, there needs to be a substantial investment in an educational campaign created and distributed in partnership with social and legal service providers to empower individuals with the knowledge that such laws exist and how to seek protection. I think of Susan, who arrived at our shelter with a lack of knowledge about her rights and services that kept her prisoner with her in her own home. She represents the thousands of women who remain hopeless without knowledge. It is an incredible act of bravery to seek protection from abuse, and we must ensure the act of reaching out in itself does not deter or re-traumatize the individuals. Healing from coercive abuse requires long-term, continuous support services. Every step in this process increases the risk these women face. The women we serve ask for the steps to be centralized for ease of access, safety, and a rapid response. Legal protections and survivor support services are critical, but they also represent that abuse has happened. The Salvation Army advocates for a root cause approach with increased investment in housing and social service provision so that dignified and appropriate services can be provided to survivors and families in a timely and a robust fashion. In closing, I would like to share the story of every woman and child who enters our shelter and has suffered from coercive behaviors. They're all hoping for a fresh start. The average length of stay at Cedar Place has grown from 16 to 53 days over the last 5 years. The lack of rent, geared to income, or deeply affordable housing forces individuals to move out into the community into shared accommodations, and ultimately, many of them return to homelessness. In their rush to find safe housing, many find themselves in financially unstable situations. They too return to homelessness. The lack of appropriate housing demands swift and decisive action with legislation requiring capital investment to mandate, grow, and preserve deeply affordable safe homes, including rent geared to income housing. Taylor and I are happy to provide further details and answers to any questions that you might have about the needs and the trends across the country. We want to thank this committee for the opportunity to be a part of this study, and we look forward to the members' questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and right on time. Next, I would like to welcome Carmen Gill. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for inviting me to present in this meeting on coercive behavior. My research focuses on the police response to intimate partner violence, IPV, especially coercive control. And as such, I conducted a survey with police officers on their perception of IPV involving coercive control. IPV is multidimensional in nature and encompasses numerous forms of violence. It is often seen as an episodic and a one-term event, and failing to address the complexity of the issue involving repetitive tactics used by abusers. Violent behavior does not necessarily involve physical violence or a single incident, but instead consists of a repeated and continuous pattern of behavior that occur over lengthy periods of time. Regardless of the violence, when the violence starts, what it looks like, it is the abuser's way of maintaining control over his partner. Since the criminal justice system primarily places emphasis on the evidence of physical violence, first responders are to find evidence of such violence. Consequently, there is a neglect to question the context of the abuse and the harm caused within these situations, which result in coercive control being unaddressed or dismissed. It is almost impossible for police officers to recognize a deprivation of rights to freedom, the obstruction to liberty, and the control situation. The recognition of coercive control as an offense would finally be a recognition that power and control over an intimate partner is a crime against the person. This would allow those caught in abusive relationship to report when they are experiencing abuse, even if it's not physical violence. Police officers must assess whether a situation is considered as IPV and potentially be criminalized. At the same time, we're asking them to recognize the signs of coercive control. So their assessment is twofold. On one hand, police officers are to determine if it is an isolated incident that is situational, caused by tension that led to a conflict escalation, or on the other hand, they must assess if the situation involves a controlling pattern from the abuser, which would not be an isolated incident. Coercive controlling behavior are not always visible to outsiders and demand a deeper interaction with the survivor to determine the pattern in place. These patterns are built up over time and characterized by the combination of different tactics to control the intimate partner. It encompasses three pillars under which various behavior can be identified. The first is the denying of resources or rights. The second, surveillance and micro-regulation. And finally, all the manifestation of violence. Coercive control blends in intimate relationships and is normalized in our society. It appears so normal that even survivors may consider they are not abused because they were not physically assaulted. Identifying coercive controlling behavior is like putting together a puzzle. It makes sense once the pieces of the puzzle relate to one another. Every professional working with survivors is in a delicate position to go beyond what they see on scene or what they consider what is IPV to ensure they have a broad understanding of the context of the situation. I think the revised Bill C-332 is illustrating some of these tactics that can allow identification of such behavior. But how to read a situation without visible physical violence? To optimize their response, police officers need to have a clear understanding of those behavior and what they look like. They need to gather evidence that would not be looked for, and it starts by identifying coercive control behavior. We have to remind ourselves that to keep this enactment of coercive control offense, to be successful, we will need to support and have adequate training for those who are going to implement it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. At this point, I would like to welcome Lisa Pigeot to speak for 5 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lisa Pigeot, and I'm the Director of Intergovernmental Relations with Les Femmes et Chefs de Pemsouac. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Spencerville, and that I humbly reside on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Oneida peoples. Les Femmes et Chefs de Pemsouac, also known as LFMO, advocates nationally and internationally for the rights, needs, and priorities of Métis women, youth, children, and 2S LGBTQIA+ Métis. verbal assaults, threats, humiliation, isolation from friends, families, and support networks, exploiting, spying, denying, blame shifting, intimidation, punishment, tracking. A pattern, not a single incident. These are all terms that can be included in the definition of coercive behavior. Is this an inclusive list? No, it's not. The problem is, how do you prove a pattern of controlling behaviors when the impacts are insidious and one may not realize they're experiencing coercive behavior to report it? More often, it may not be realized until physical violence ensues. Almost 2/3 of Métis women self-report experiencing physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. Nearly half are survivors of intimate partner violence. Canada has used as an example a bill passed in the UK around controlling of coercive conduct. What the UK bill does not consider is the specific implications around Métis women and the strained historical relationship with police and other colonial process. Pair this with the fact that systemic racism is still rampant in all structures that are intended to protect us. We ask if, upon criminalization of coercive behavior, will police officers be able to assess intimate partner violence situations that do not present the physical violence when they arrive on scene? Will they have enough understanding of the dynamic to see if someone is in the presence of a potentially harmful situation? What also must be examined is what other scenarios do women and gender diverse folks face coercive control outside of intimate partner violence? Can it be experienced in an employment scenario, in healthcare systems? Yes, we see this in the case of forced and coerced sterilizations and in other systems. The burden of proof will always befall the victim to convince authorities that they have been coercively controlled. The emphasis on physical risk assessment tools on physical violence and injuries leads to the minimalization of non-physical violence. To further complicate this interpretation is the issue again of systemic racism, further compounded by individual biases of persons in position of authority. Contemporarily, we hear of an increase in threats utilizing technology, such as text messaging and social media channels. A fundamental concern that has been previously raised by Les Femmes de Pemswak is that in reporting IPV, the scenario is often weaponized against women and gender diverse folks. This is the case when child welfare is brought in. They have already been threatened by the abuser that if they call the authorities, they will lose their children. One may not feel that their interests will be protected in reporting coercive behavior, let alone physical violence. Further to this, LFMO supports a ban on parental alienation accusations to protect women and children in family court. Parental alienation is used to silence mothers and children who report family violence. What is required to counteract coercive behavior is a vigorous plan for information sharing, training, education, and awareness. Solutions to coercive behavior requires broad investment in the transition health sector, in healthcare and education systems, community services, housing, and justice. LFMO has several recommendations centered around combating coercive behavior. We'd like to see the scaling up of distinctions-based wraparound cultural supports, a guaranteed livable income with no service cuts, expanding access to secure, no-barrier housing, increase access to food security, transportation, holistic healthcare, education, and childcare, access to free, responsive legal services, the decriminalization of survival, and banning of parental alienation accusations against the mother and family violence cases. LFMO remains committed to pushing back against wider systemic oppression that supports conditions for violence to flourish and makes access to justice and care for Métis women and gender diverse people even more difficult. Thank you for today.
Thank you all for your opening remarks. We will now move on to our first round of questions. Dominique, vous avez 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here to clarify us on this issue of coercive behavior. Ms. Carmen, my first questions for you. It's quite obvious everyone that has spoken to us since we started the study, the difficulty surrounding the burden of proof that is on the shoulders of the victim. It's a very delicate issue because upstream it's very hard. We are told to identify these behaviors and being able to present evidence before a court or even just relating the events to the police is hard enough. Then getting into the judicial process, it's a steeper hill to climb. Based on all your research, the fact of criminalizing coercive behavior would really facilitate. We have Bill C-332, quite interesting, in the works right now. Do you think this would facilitate some of the actions carried out by women, being willing to denounce these crimes, being believed by the police, and thirdly, being able to convince the judge that they were clearly victims of coercive behavior? First of all, if you look at the bill, if you're based on the bill to say you can determine some behaviors that will be repeated, police officers will eventually have the right tools to carry out better investigations on these types of violations. I think it's linked to the types of questions they ask. And this issue of the burden of proof, it's not only on the victim, but it's all the evidence that can be gathered by the police, I believe, and they are not necessarily going to see if there are some injuries, if there is property damage. The questions will be more targeted related to this coercive behavior, and also studying body language. If there are body-worn cameras, if the police officers already have these body-worn cameras, they can present some pieces of evidence that could come into play later. Sorry, sorry, Madam Carmen. Are you talking about this home cameras? Maybe I didn't understand you too clearly. Yeah, I'm talking about police officers. Some police services use these body-worn cameras when they intervene. So that could be an additional piece of evidence. So you could have some also other types of evidence, emails, parents that can clearly show that the person is no longer in contact with her, and also friends. It's not only the victim. The burden is not solely on the victim. So what you're saying is you've spoken about this toolbox, investigation strategies to facilitate the process. And the Salvation Army, I do have a lot of questions for them too. There is a lady, I forget her name, who was talking about training for Crown prosecutors, judges. We had some moving testimony, I don't know, from a victim. I don't know if this is information. Do you believe in information of that nature? You can have a violation. You can have a crime relating to coercive behavior if we don't train people working in the justice system on that. It starts with the police understanding what coercive behavior is, Crown prosecutors, defense lawyers, and judges. Thank you, Ms. Gill. So let me turn to your colleagues. You spoke about 3 pillars. Maybe I didn't take the right notes, but talk about prevention, deprivation, control, demonstration of violence. So that's quickly what I jotted down. Do you necessarily require all 3? Or is one of these sufficient to prove coercive behavior? We can do microcontrol. Maybe there might not be physical violence. When I speak of coercive control, it involves both physical and non-physical violence. You don't need to have all three elements present to define control. It's going so fast, Madam Gill, I don't have that much time. I had a lot of questions, but time is so short. I trust that my colleagues will be raising some of the same questions.
Minutes.
Yes, thank you very much, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. I'd like to start my question, though, with Ms. Gill, because you were talking about the research that you've done, particularly with the perceptions and with police. And one of the things that we've heard in this committee is on the issue of criminalization of coercive control, that without the wraparound services, it could actually backfire and be used against the women. And so my first question is that you mentioned sometimes the survivors themselves are not even aware that they're victims of this until maybe much afterwards when they start seeing others. And so in that case, how difficult would it be if there was a criminal offense for that kind of enforcement by the police? Unless, and what would we need to have if we did do that to make sure that it didn't get used in ways that would actually harm women?
Well, thank you for the question. I think more and more we're talking about coercive control. We're raising awareness within the population. So we're starting to see women, well, I'm seeing women that are calling me and asking, when is this going to be criminalized? I already know that for doing roundtables with police officers, that they are looking for something, because they understand there's something happening when they respond to a scene, but the situation is not criminalized because they don't have those evidence that they are supposed to find, which is physical violence, injuries, damage to the property. So they are left with nothing. And whether we criminalize or not coercive control, police officers need to document better situation, even if it's not criminalized. And if they are to understand what is coercive control, they can better support the victim and potentially as well refer the perpetrator somewhere.
Very much. I have a question for Ms. Ridley and Salvation Army. In terms of what you're seeing, because you're seeing these women, these survivors, very quickly, and the children as well, when they're trying to get out of these situations. What do you see as the gaps in being able to help people who have been subject to coercive control, not just to get out, but to be able to stay out, to not go back? And more importantly, how do we prevent it in the first place?
I think, as you said, it's a systemic approach to creating a sustainable solution. So as Barbara said, many of the women that enter our shelter, the length of stay is increased. We've gone from 15, 16 days to up to 53 days where they have to stay because there is that gap in the housing spectrum of supply in that supportive, deeply affordable space. That is the space that these women need to enter because there is an aspect of financial control. They haven't had access to the funds. They haven't been allowed to work. So what they need is an affordable rental, and that supply has been drying up. So increased investment in that space, absolutely, because we don't want individuals to stagnate in their survival process. Once they've reached out for help, if it's not a continuous momentum, there's a real danger of going back to your abuser. And so that's why we need to have the supply so you can move quickly through. The other side of that is the support services. And these are lifelong support services. This is an abuse that puts a mark on your soul for the rest of your life. It opens up on a random Tuesday. It opens up on special occasions. It's a piece that will live with you. But what we're seeing in the immediate service need, we're looking at a community hub model. We've spoke about the dangers. If I'm having to go to a lawyer to seek custody issues, I'm going to the shelter to see how can I have housing support. I have to go to someone else to see an employment counselor. Every time I leave, my life is at risk. So how do we centralize these services either into one location or in somehow a community hub model so that it's a one place that I can go and access all of my services and I'm not at risk long term?
Thank you. It sounds like these women are very courageous. Thank you for that. Yes. And I do have a question for Ms. Pigot.
Okay.
So
I'll make
go
it real
ahead.
quick.
Yeah.
So what we do know for sure is that the police definitely need further education on this. But I also know that we need a really robust education plan throughout our country so that women know what it is and that they actually feel safe enough to get the help they desperately need. Thank you.
Very important. Ms. Pigot, very quickly, I just want to go back to the idea of the criminalization, because of course that would require law enforcement. And I know that the relationship between Indigenous peoples and Métis peoples and law enforcement is sometimes one of distrust. Do you think that criminalization might aggravate how that relationship with the police would be in that case?
I do think it would, that historical trauma and that relationship with policing will be impacted by the criminalization. There's already that existing fear that women and gender diverse folks have. So, when police are intervening on probably one of the most difficult scenario in a woman and gender diverse person's experience. They'll be leery of disclosing everything. When you talk about a pattern of coercive behavior, how can we get 1, 2, 5, 10, 50 years of experience with an abuser out in a very short scenario that the police officer is intervening? So I do think the relationship will complicate that further in allowing a woman or a gender diverse person to speak their truth.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
You. Next, Adrienne, vous avez 6.
You have 6 minutes for questions. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses for your presence here with us today. But at the same time, somewhat still shocked by some of the figures I heard in the opening remarks from the Salvation Army. We see more and more cities, municipalities declaring intimate partner violence. They describe it as an epidemic, and some of the figures you're presenting today do confirm that it's a real scourge. It seems to be only the tip of the iceberg, because there are so many women who don't even have the courage to denounce this. So in all the work you do, in handling people, in human trafficking, there is a lot of work you have been doing to assist victims of human trafficking, and also the work you do for victims of family violence. You invited me to come visit a shelter in Montreal. So what do you think I could learn some more to add to this study on coercive control by coming to visit the shelter that is managed by the Salvation Army? Ms. Ridley, if you can take the first shot at that.
Shelter as well. But I think especially coming to see, we encourage all to visit with their local, we're in 400 communities, so all can please. Oh.
Pardon, Madame la Présidente, est-ce qu'on peut mettre une pause sur le temps? Je n'entends pas la traduction.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
So if you could just continue speaking, just random words so that we can see if the translation is working.
Yes, absolutely. As I was saying, we're in 400 communities, so we encourage everyone in this room to reach out and visit with their local Salvation Army footprint.
Adrienne, c'est bon? Wait. Okay. Continue.
To see the human impact, because we speak to trends, but there's also the power in the individualized stories, because it speaks to the need for a robust, systematic approach to housing and social services, because each woman's need, each child's need is different. There are trends that we speak to and we encourage, but that would be the power in visiting the shelter. But I'll allow Barb to share the true power of visiting.
Well, you certainly would be welcome, first off. Thanks, Madam Chair, through you. So there's a lot to learn when you enter a shelter. I've been working in the shelter for a year and a half now, and it has been an awesome time of learning. What I know is that many of the women do not even know they're being abused. They just see it as somehow they've done something wrong or they're not enough. And so that is why this coercive behavior has continued. I think the other part is that there's many women who are in the shelter who have physical violence, and it's easier to see. But what's not so easy to see is the impact that it's had on the children that enter our services. They're many times quiet, shy, tearful, cranky at times. And these children have been impacted to the point that sometimes when they have to go visit their parent, their behavior changes the following day, and it can be long-term. So the impact is huge, and you'd be more than welcome to come to visit us. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je tenterai de revenir.
Thank you. I would have more questions for you later, but I'll do a first round. Following up with Ms. Gill, you mentioned an example in Quebec, but you really didn't give us that example. You were answering my colleague, Ms. Fian, and there was an additional question. But you did talk about some examples from Quebec, so if you can tell us a little bit more about that. Yes. We're discussing training police officers, Crown prosecutors, judges. I know in Quebec, the DPLCPA has come up with a clear definition for coercive behavior, and Crown prosecutors are required to take those into account if there are behaviors, if they're controlling behaviors. So if we're trying to prove the existence of this behavior, there are some police officers that have already started receiving training in Quebec compared to other areas in Canada, and this training is really explained by the women's defense groups, whether it's training being provided on coercive control to improve judicial practices, and the BDPC has received this sort of training with the regroupement. I know it was a recommendation flowing from the report strengthening confidence or trust. Some MPs explained in Quebec that the criminalization was more of federal jurisdiction. I know there are specialized courts, and I think this information flows from those recommendations that are currently being tested in Quebec now. I'm not sure if they really flow from specialized courses in Canada, but these exist everywhere in Canada, obviously. The co-workers, as we say, the professionals in the specialized areas, they have to have a better understanding of coercive control, understanding family violence, and also sexual violence. These issues are being studied in Quebec also.
6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. My first question is for Madame Riley or Briscoe. Briscoe, perfect. So one of the, we have a lot of shelters in my riding, and one of the things we've pushed for is low barrier spaces, even for people fleeing violence. Is your space low barrier?
Yes.
It is? So you can consume substances and still be allowed in?
Yes.
Okay.
We have lockers on the outside where individuals can put their paraphernalia or whatever.
Great.
But they can come in. We only ask that they do not use in the house because we do have children.
Great. I think I asked that because, there's a lot of rhetoric right now. I know that particularly for people as a coping mechanism that are dealing with violence, it's not uncommon to use substances. So I'm very happy that you provide that service. You spoke a little bit about housing rent geared to income. I actually have a bill on the floor, or rent geared to income. I actually have a bill on the floor to put in place a guaranteed livable basic income. And what I said in my speech yesterday is we can talk in the House about wanting to deal with gender-based violence, but if we don't provide people with the resources, that they need when we know that there's real solutions, we are doing a disservice to people in the country. Would you agree that one of the things that's needed if we're really going to tackle gender-based violence is a guaranteed livable basic income?
Thank you for the question. Policies that put money back into the hands of those in need are ones that we've seen the most success in moving our individuals to sustainability. So whether it's a guaranteed basic income approach, we've also seen the building block approach. We have individuals in our shelters across Canada benefiting from the disability benefit. We've seen in provinces that have raised social assistance rates that they're seeing more success. So it is policies that do put the money back versus a kind of tax deduction at the end of the year are more successful. We have also seen that there's also a lot of infrastructure that needs to go with that automatic filing programs of which we have partnered with. We file taxes every year to ensure individuals do receive those benefits, but that's...
You also spoke about, I think you did, Madame Bristros, about long-term impacts of gender-based violence, including coercive control. I met a woman, I'm going to say it very quickly, was fleeing violence, had her kids, was not able to deal with her feelings around that violence because she had to work a minimum wage job. Like, she just had to go to work to support her kids. She had no ability to deal with her trauma. She came up to me, actually, and I hate these stories because they sound political, but it was true because it was about guaranteed livable basic income. And she said, "Thank you, I need that so I can heal." Do you think providing those kinds of financial supports, in addition to things like rent guaranteed income, are critical if we are going to support individuals with the ability of actually being able to leave, and then the healing that they might require to stay and move forward in a way that is safer, like, or I don't want to use judgmental terms, but free from violence?
Yeah, it allows for a more resilient escape, I would say. That's how I've characterized it, in that it allows them to continuously access the services that they need without having to compromise on the choices and the tough choices that a mother will always make. She'll always put her children first. So it will be, I'll feed my children, I won't get the care I need. And we can eliminate those decisions.
My next question, thank you so much. My next question is for Madame Gill. Did your research involve, so we know, for example, for women's shelters, police are often not allowed to drop people off at shelters because there's high rates of violence among police officers, and often they want to keep those locations secret. Did your research involve the amount of police that are actually involved in cases where they are the perpetrators of domestic violence?
That's an excellent question, but no, I am not. I have not studied police officers that are perpetrators themselves.
I ask that because what we've seen in other studies, and I'll follow up with you after Madame Pissou, but that often police are not in a good position to make those assessments, that they need training. I know that you had mentioned that. What concerns me more is they can often be involved in the violence. Do you think it would be more helpful to, instead of having police make that assessment, to have mental health professionals, when they know that there's cases of domestic violence, lead the intervention?
Not necessarily, because for example, in some police agencies, they do have special units. They have special investigators that are going to work with victims, but we need to really be able to remove police officers when we start knowing that they are involved themselves in abusing their spouses. That's clear to me. So this is something that police agencies are responsible for doing. So without removing those police officers, we're just jeopardizing the victims.
Thank you. At that point, the time is up. Thank you.
Sorry, my time.
Terrific. Next, we have Michelle Ferrari. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you so much to the witnesses for being here today as we continue our study on coercive control. And I think the first thing that I'd like to ask, and I'll go right if I can to Ms. Ridley or Ms. Briscoe from Salvation Army. I think one of the issues that we have from a justice system perspective is we don't actually have a definition or a legal definition of coercive control. Based on your experience and the testimony you've provided today, you've brought up some very, very valid points of a lot of these survivors and people living in this right now don't actually know that they're in a coercive control relationship. Often it's generational. That was the relationship that was shown to them as children. They think that is what is normal. And often you're dealing with highly manipulative people who tell you you're good, hang on to you, then take it away from you. And it's a difficult thing to describe to somebody if they've never dealt with it or experienced it. So my first question would be, how would you define coercive control? And I can give you a reference that we have if you wanted, but if you already have one, that I'd love to hear it.
A reference would be fine. We can comment on that as well.
Yeah, so there is a bill. It's Bill C-332, which is an act to amend the criminal code, and one of the references they say is this bill amends the criminal code. I'm just trying to find it here, including a fear of violence, a decline in their physical or mental health, or a substantial adverse effect on their day-to-day activities.
In addition to that, part of the definition that we provide is the inclusion of specific acts such as threats, intimidation, isolation, as well as then a separate piece for the application of those against the children and weaponizing the removal of children. We see that it does increase the education of what constitutes abuse for women. We don't ever want to be too prescriptive because it simply gives the abuser a way to innovate. And so we don't want to, and that's the balance of law that we need to be able to provide for all victims. So those are incredibly important to include so that we do enumerate certain pieces. And we extend that to the children as well, giving them a lever to pull so that they can stand up and say, this happened to me. It was a betrayal that as my parent or protector, this wasn't supposed to happen, and they deserve that justice too.
Do you use the term coercive control with the folks using your services? Are they familiar with it?
Yes, actually we have just started using that term. Before that it was intimate partner violence or domestic violence, but it is a new term and we have been using it. And what I find is that the women and children who do come to us, the way we explain it is it's repetitive behavior that is silent and not an act of overly violence, but it's the controlling, needing the phone to see who they called, that repeated behavior. That's what we term as coercive behavior. And it's very effective because that's when women start saying, oh, that happened to me.
Mm-hmm. They have to make that connection. Do you think that, I like that you reiterated that it's a pattern. I think we've heard that from other witnesses. Do you think it's beneficial to replace domestic violence with coercive control? Because I think sometimes the wording in itself can create confusion. Or do you think they're interchangeable?
Myself, what I see is that domestic violence can include a child to a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or uncle. It's in familial violence, whereas intimate partner violence is between a couple that are intimate. And I see coercive control is something, I like the three terms, and the reason being because coerciveness is that silent killer, that silent violence. And so many people are unaware that that's wrong. They think unless they've been hit or kicked or spit upon, it hasn't happened. But in fact, it has.
Yeah, it's 30 seconds. Okay, just quickly, if you can just touch on your housing. I think that's critical. If we could get that on the record for recommendations that you'd like to see more affordable, safe housing, and what you'd like to see the government do to achieve that.
Thank you.
There's been a substantial, we're talking about supply all across the country, and there's a large focus on supply for ownership purposes, and there needs to be an equal focus now, an investment on the creation and the maintenance of current affordable supply, and that includes investments in the entire spectrum, emergency, transitional, and supportive shelters. And so that's what we would be calling for.
Excellent. Thank you. Emanuela, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being here to answer some questions today. I'm going to start with Ms. Pigeot. You spoke a bit about Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people, and you expressed some concerns that you have with criminalizing coercive control. And you also spoke about a different experience that Indigenous women have had when dealing with the police, and it's something we've heard many times at this committee. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to what particular recommendations you would recommend to our committee when putting forward recommendations on this study regarding coercive control, in particular with regard to the fact that when women sometimes go to the police or go to the authorities, their children may be taken away from them. And that is also something we've heard from witnesses at this committee. It is crazy that this happens in this day and age. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that and talk about what protections we can be recommending here in order to make sure that whatever it is that we end up doing doesn't negatively impact this community.
I think, so in doing what's happened over 200 years is not going to be overnight. And so the systemic oppression that we've experienced isn't going to go away with the criminalization of coercive behavior. So our recommendations would be around awareness, both for persons that may be experiencing coercive behavior, but also the education within the systems, within the authorities, within policing, within justice, within healthcare. I think those are primary recommendations to ensure that there are some other supportive safeguards around. There's other systems such as education, whatnot, that would play an additional important role in curbing the coercive behaviors. But I think the issues that were raised as well by my fellow witnesses today, especially around housing and that barrier-free access. The question of how do you undo the 200 years, I'm not certain I could answer in this short of a time for you to undo the colonization. But I think the long and short of us is involving us in the discussions, involving us in the change, involving us in the plans, in allowing us to find out the information, making attempts to repair challenging relationships. We see some movement towards that, but much, much more has to be done.
Thank you very much. I guess that my question I didn't express it very well, but I appreciate your response. And I guess my next question is from Ms. Gill. You spoke about the fact that the criminal justice system needs to get more involved in order to be more effective in getting the police and the justice system to react to coercive control and to be able to act on it. Do you think that our criminal justice system is equipped to effectively respond to coercive control becoming a criminal offense?
Without training, without awareness about what it is, I'm not sure. But if you provide some tools, if you provide some information, you do some sessions with different stakeholders, then you could be prepared for that. I'm already working. I've done presentation to the National Judicial Institute with judges. This is my third presentation in 3 years about coercive control, and they're looking at how can they see this in their profession. So you already see that there is a willingness to learn more about this, but we need to as well recognize that it's not just the justice system that needs to be better equipped. It's also the healthcare system, social services that will need to be better equipped. I mean, everyone that is going to work with survivors and abusers need to better understand what we're dealing with. It's a big undertaking, but it's one step at a time. And if I can surf on what Madame Pigeot was saying, we don't solve the issue overnight. And we are dealing with systemic issues as well, so we need to take this into consideration.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Adrienne. You have 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, I would like to thank the witnesses for being here today and your contribution to this important study to try to find a solution to this epidemic of family violence. So I'll continue with the witnesses. First, you, Madame Pigeot. Yes, trying to really study this issue of coercive control. It's not just waving a magic wand. It's making sure that there is a continuum of service that is put in place. There was a recent story on Electro Rouge. We're talking about police training. We're trying to rebuild trust, to explain clearly what coercive control is. How do you see this? And in this Retro Bush study, there was a witness from the indigenous community that remind us that we have to work very hard to reestablish trust with the police, to inform them, to get them to contribute through adequate training. What do you think about that?
I think it's an important step to, we have to rebuild that trust with the system, and especially policing. And I think there has to be a shift from the view of policing being a punitive body, because that is the perspective of Indigenous women. When police are involved, there's punishment involved, rather than policing involved. That's a system that's there to support us, to bring us to safety. So how you make that shift involves many system players. It involves, really just at the base, the involvement of all Indigenous people, and more specifically Indigenous women.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I have less than 15 seconds left, but 25 seconds very quickly. If someone in 10, 15 seconds can add something. I think you named the bill C-332. Madam Gill also mentioned it. So in what ways can that study complete the bill? Quickly, in a few seconds.
The legal changes in both the criminal code, but the family law is not to be forgotten, that it completes the circle, and really the issues that we're seeing and the concerns that have been raised at the committee of this coercion then being used against victims, closing the loop with family law is really what's critical there to ensure that those protections and the concerns of children, they won't be further victimized.
Perfect. We're a little bit lenient there, so we'll probably take that into consideration. Not go with the full third round. So Leah, if you have 2.5 minutes to finish this round.
So much. My last questions are for Madame Pigeot. You spoke. I have a bill that I put forward in the House. I actually began second reading, the first hour of debate for second reading yesterday for a guaranteed livable basic income in response to call for Justice 4.5 of the National Inquiry. Why is a guaranteed livable basic income so critical, even in cases today we're talking about coercive control, but just in terms of assisting individuals trying to flee gender-based violence?
Part of that coercive control and coercive behavior is that financial control that's held over our women and gender diverse folks. So a guaranteed livable income will help to put women and gender diverse persons on a good foot in starting out a life independent and free from violence. We have to look at in addition to the guaranteed livable income, those health supports that are required, making sure that they're in place, because all those
Sorry,
are currently barriers.
Can I stop you there just because I want to get this point? So would you recommend that a guaranteed livable basic income be put in place to support women fleeing abuse, including economic abuse, any other kinds of abuse? Yes or no? Sorry, if you could respond. Ms. Misu? Hello? Ms. Misu?
Oh.
Yeah, yes or no? Would you recommend that?
I apologize. My connection was unstable. I believe when I left, you asked me if it was. If my recommendation was a yes.
Yeah. To flee violence as a critical piece for women fleeing violence, including economic abuse, coercive control, domestic abuse. Would you recommend?
It's crucial.
It's crucial. Okay, thank you. And then you can finish your last statement. I'm so sorry about that. I just wanted to get that on record.
So I guess the guaranteed livable income, and we look at sort of. Especially Métis women having, lower educational attainment and less of an ability to be able to earn a livable income while they're caring for their children, and also multi-generational caregivers.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So that will conclude our panel for today. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank our witnesses for your sensitive testimony. We will suspend for about 5 minutes to transition into camera portion of the meeting to consider the draft report on women's economic empowerment. you.